All right. So now I'm going to cover volume 10. And I'm going to use Grok to summarize it. So, yeah, I make some theoretical clarifications on Ascensionism. And basically, the basis of correct ideas, the basis of Ascensionist thought. Sorry, let me close the door. Sorry. So the basis of Ascensionist thought is intuition. All knowledge is ultimately based on intuition, not some provable data, because like the axioms that we depend on for all our knowledge, all our conclusions, cannot be justified externally. They are simply accepted as true. So intuition is the foundation of Ascensionism. It's the foundation of any system of ideas, but people might pretend like they're objectively correct or whatever. I've already explained issues with epistemology in other places in my text as well. Anyways, so the world we reside within. So right now, the current world that we live in is characterized by mediocrity, stagnation, ennui, and decline. So the world is in a fallen state. It's spiritually inferior and stagnant, and there's this sense of ubiquitous misery that you can't really escape. I'm sure a lot of people feel it, and of course, I'm not saying everyone will feel this, but overall, a lot of people do feel this way. So bureaucrats superficially run every major institution: government, education, law, finance, media, military, but they are parasitic, arrogant, and spiritually impotent. Bureaucracies themselves are controlled by hidden shadow elites, evil satanic forces. So look, the bureaucrats aren't actually in power. There's a difference between nominal power and actual power. Nominal power are the people that you think are in charge, such as the government, such as officials like the president, like the diplomats, like the Department of Justice or whatever, right? Those are the people you think are in power. But nominal power is not real power. Actual power is in the shadow elites who are Satanists and who control power through evil. So shadow elites maintain power through extremely evil acts like ritual murder, human sacrifices, etc. So because they engage in such evil things with their fellow evil doers, they create an unbreakable secret alliance via shared guilt and blackmail. So basically, if you want to become super powerful, you have to sacrifice your conscience. You have to engage in a satanic ritual with other evil doers. And because you engage in a ritual with these fellow people, you can't. First of all, you're isolated from the majority of people, right? So like you're evil, right? You can't relate to anyone except your fellow Satanists who are also billionaires and or like very powerful people. And you also, because you engage in this kind of demonic ritual together, because you do evil things together, you all have blackmail on each other. So you want to cooperate with each other pragmatically, because if you don't cooperate with each other, then someone's gonna blackmail you, right? So you can't, you sort of have to cooperate with someone if they have blackmail on you, right? So yeah. And so all the members within these secret evil groups are forced into a fight or die commitment. So the two paths are either for them to gain power or face consequences. So okay, what happens if you're part of this evil group and you don't want to gain power? What will happen is that one of your fellow evildoers will just use their blackmail on you to gain power for themselves, because they see that you're useless. They see that you're not gaining power for the group, so you might as well be excluded, and you might as well be blackmailed so that they can use you for power. And because they do want to eliminate you, since you might blackmail them if they don't blackmail you, right? And so another thing is, when you've done such an evil thing, you sort of want to justify this by gaining as much power as possible. And obviously, if you do gain as much power as possible, then hopefully you can avoid the consequences, right? Maybe. So yeah, so Jeffrey Epstein is definitely a surface level operator of the shadow elites. I don't think he's the most powerful. I think he's like, there's probably hidden people that he works for. He's probably a subordinate, a puppet. And so this kind of shadow elite power, it's beyond national law, it's beyond international law. So normal people, nominal elites, and even bureaucracies are easily co-opted, divided, or conquered. So any bureaucracy, any government department, any aspect of the government can easily be co-opted by the shadow elite, or at least influenced to the extent that they're not like a threat in themselves. And nominal elites are people who you think are in power, like Donald Trump, for example. You think he's actually the president, but he's definitely a puppet of other forces, right? Like, why would he um want to engage in a protracted war against Iran? If like Trump wants to benefit the American economy, obviously a war in Iran doesn't do that. He doesn't. So it's just like, okay, he's definitely there's definitely a lot of people who are using Trump as a puppet. Think of the Christian Zionist lobby. Think of the Israel lobby, right? Think of the Epstein class. Those are people who actually control Donald Trump. Now, remember, all of this is for educational and entertainment purposes. I do not promote any form of discrimination. This video is simply for speculation, for curiosity. Anyways, so what is the purpose and nature of Ascensionism? Ascensionism confronts this grim reality and offers an anti-bureaucratic, anti-co-optable ideology. There is no realistic plan to overthrow the shadow elites because grassroots movements or official channels are going to be infiltrated and co-opted by them anyways. Instead, the goal is to give individuals personal purpose, meaning, and principles so that they are not mere pawns of Satanists or bureaucrats. Even the attempt to do good in an evil world is worthwhile regardless of success. Up or down instead of good and evil. So the dichotomy between good and evil is what morality is founded upon, but I think the Ascensionist moral equivalent, the replacement for morality should be, rather than good or evil, it should be up versus down, right? You should, because there is, hierarchy is an axiom. You want to move up the hierarchy of value. And so problem is the term good and evil, they've been moralized in a very bad way. Like conventional morality is just slave morality. It's herd morality, as Nietzsche would say. So, what does good mean? It means being weak. It means being a pussy. That's what good would conventionally mean. What does being evil mean? It means you make people feel bad. Okay, these words like good and evil, yes, they're very rhetorically useful. They're very useful to invoke certain emotions. They're very useful for the purpose of argumentation. But in terms of objective meaning, they're not very useful, because problem is, if you want to be good, then okay. If you want to be treated as a good person, what you should do is be weak and docile, and then you just be conquered by other people, right? You get conquered by the shadow elite. You get conquered by Luciferian forces because you think being good is being weak. And so I'm not going to accept this dichotomy. So moral judgments are reframed as up versus down rather than good versus evil, right? So we need to be beyond good and evil. What does beyond good and evil mean? It means being up. It means being ascendant. It means being triumphant. It means achieving magnificence and greatness beyond the status quo. And that is, so up versus down is the new dichotomy rather than good versus evil. So this framework prevents stagnation because there is no stationary finish line. Ascent is endless upward movement. So we need to continue becoming greater. We need to continue achieving ever greater magnificence. We need to climb higher just for the purpose of climbing higher. There's no end point. There's no point where we rest on a hammock and be like, just chill. We need to keep going. Ascensionism is inherently opposed to any status quo that promotes mediocrity or decline. So on the openness of Ascensionism, the ideology is intentionally vague and open-ended to avoid being dogmatic, rigid, or stationary. So I want people to form their own sects of Ascensionism. I don't want people to just agree with me blindly. And yes, there's no, I don't, it's very difficult to understand what, it's difficult to put into words what Ascensionism is, right? You can't reduce it to language, because Ascensionism is about constant change in a positive direction. There's no stopping point. So to even describe Ascensionism will be to put it in a cage, right? It's to achieve greater greatness. It's to move up the value hierarchy constantly, okay? There's no end point to Ascensionism. That's why I'm not putting it into a closed box. So dogma stifles creativity and science, so we don't want to be dogmatic. Readers are encouraged to form their own versions of Ascensionism, and we support a free market of ideas. And we don't want Ascensionism to be corrupt. We don't want Ascensionism to be reduced to bureaucracy. We definitely don't want Ascensionism to be reduced to a vessel for the Epstein class. Regaining the Ascensionist intuition, the drive to ascend must be actively regained through religious devotion and creative visualization. Logic alone is insufficient. Living intuition is required. So Ascensionism requires a kind of intuition that it needs to be regained, because people have become mediocre because of herd morality. People have become mediocre because of bureaucratization and being standardized into formal rules. Like, no, you can't. If you want to be an Ascensionist, you have to think outside the box. You have to develop a kind of intuition for magnificence that cannot be reduced to language. It cannot be fully explained. It's just a practice that you have to um, attempt. It is like you have to make the leap towards magnificence, and you have to align your inner spirit with magnificence and with elevation. You need to possess an elevated soul, and this is not something which I can make an instruction manual for. I cannot make a guidebook for becoming greatness. Sorry, for becoming great. I cannot make a guidebook for explaining what it means to be elevated, to be ascensionary. This is something um that comes from within. So there's three fundamental. So there's three foundational outcomes of the Ascensionist revolution. So we should abolish taxation to prevent parasites, abolish central banking, which is just another form of taxation. So we need to stop parasitism and we need to achieve superabundance. I've already explained this in past lectures. I've already explained this in past articles, so I don't need to explain this again. But I simply repeat myself a lot in the doctrine because, well, that's how you consolidate the important points. So the problem of unavoidable stagnation, I've already talked about this before. Now, history shows that there are cycles of rise and fall. That empires collapse, everything dies, and primitive religions view reality as cyclical rather than progressively ascending. This is very important because I think the ancient mythologies that define human consciousness, the way in which humans used to understand the world, is very important. I'm not saying they're completely right, but they should need to be considered. So, primitive, so pre-modern humans and even many like people today believe in reality as cyclical rather than progressive. So there's this modern myth of progress where history is a progressive line towards greatness. It's like, okay, the more time goes on, the better things get. That's I think that kind of optimism is gained because of technological advances, because of the Industrial Revolution. But it's very possible that we're just in line for another correction, another collapse. It's possible that we are not going to progress towards, greater heights. We might actually be headed for inevitable stagnation and collapse, just like every period of greatness has eventually collapsed in history, right? So, many religions viewed history as cyclical in that existence was a cycle of life and death. So, like primitive religions, maybe some like indigenous tribes might believe that reality is a cycle of life and death. You die and then you're recycled back into nature. And so there's no progress. It's just a cycle. It's just like a circle, a vicious circle rather than any progress. And this would actually defeat the Ascensionist movement. So if reality was a cycle, if the cosmos fundamentally operated in a cyclical fashion, then Ascensionism would be false. And there would basically be no way for us Ascensionists to succeed. So if Ascensionism is doomed to failure, nonetheless, you should still promote Ascensionism. Nonetheless, you should seek to strive for greater magnificence, no matter what, because it's not about whether you externally succeed or not. It's about what you are internally aligned with. It's about that is what it means to be virtuous. That is what it means to be magnificent. In a tragic way, but yes. Now, so okay, let's cover volume 11 now. I'll just actually I'll tell it to make a summary because yes, I wrote all of these myself, but what was it again? Maybe somewhere here. Bro, where the fuck is it's volume 11, right? Yeah, volume 11. Sorry. Are these the same? Probably. All right, so I'm gonna read off the summary. All right, so chapter 11 begins with a dialogue between me and a student. This is all fictional. So this volume is structured as a dialogue, blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah. A dialogue between Hemlock and a student. So basically, a student asks, what are the alternatives to Ascensionism? And why is Ascensionism superior to any other ideology? So the alternatives are consequentialism, monotheism, and polytheism. So consequentialism is basically all secular political ideologies. Because they don't have a higher God, because they don't have a higher purpose, they just basically say maximize utility, maximize the best consequences. Sorry. And monotheism, okay, so the most popular forms of monotheism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, right? That's an alternative. Those are alternatives to Ascensionism. Polytheism is sort of ignored because it's just more relativism. It doesn't really matter. Anyways, so monotheism often promotes slave morality. I'm not saying it always does, but that's sort of the most popular framing of what monotheism is. It's really just slave morality. It's like just be mediocre, just be weak. It's like, why? It's like, oh no, because Jesus, this is what Jesus did. He sacrificed himself, so you should sacrifice yourself as well. It's very it's unfortunately it's such a perversion of Christ. I mean, Jesus was really a great man who did sacrifice himself, but I don't think he would want to be mischaracterized such that everyone should just be a slave for him. Like, this is, anyways. I'm going on a tangent. So forget about this. So monotheism promotes slave morality, and I mean, Islam literally means submission. And once again, I'm not promoting any form of discrimination. I'm just making hypothetical arguments. So monotheism promotes slave morality. Islam means submission. Christianity is worshiping suffering. So Christians worship a man being tortured to death. This promotes slave morality. Even though there are, okay, let me be nuanced here. There are many formulations of monotheistic religions like Christianity and Islam and Judaism that are not all aligned with slave morality. But that gets lost in translation. The kind of ideology that typical priests or that street level preachers will promote, it's just slave morality. It's just be weak. It's just don't have your own moral compass. It's just be a slave to the priests. And but there's way more nuance in other ways of understanding these religions that aren't captured by normal discourse. But unfortunately, the most popular forms of religion are always the most watered down version. And the most popular forms of these religions are slave morality. And that's not a coincidence. It's because they promote power structures. It's because religion is a tool of empire. Religion is a tool for powerful people to exploit the illiterate and stupid masses. So yeah. Anyways, so monotheism promotes slave morality. This castrates human creativity and leads to stagnation. Ascensionism only worships the principle of elevatum, ascent beyond possibilities. Ascent beyond all possibilities. If God promotes decline, then God is wrong. So atheistic secular ideologies rest on materialism, which collapses into moral relativism and nihilism. So a materialist, so let's say an atheist ideology is typically materialist. And materialism will typically collapse into moral relativism, and moral relativism is the same as nihilism, which is just basically hedonism. So this explains the rising mental illness despite technological progress. Secular systems are all forms of bureaucratism, rule-bound administrative power that inevitably becomes parasitic, conformist, mediocre, and spiritually sterile. So think about bureaucracy. So basically, atheism is materialism. Materialism leads to moral relativism. Relativism leads to nihilism. Nihilism leads to hedonism. Hedonism leads to bureaucratism, right? Because if you're a nihilist and you think nothing matters, then you think, okay, maximize pleasure, right? That's consequentialism, that's utilitarianism, same thing, okay? So nihilism leads to hedonism. Hedonism leads to bureaucracy. You think bureaucracy is like, okay, we want a nanny state that promotes the individuals and everyone's hedonistic interests. As long as it's bureaucracy, as long as people are sedated and comfortable, then everything is good, right? So bureaucracy is just a system of maintaining administrative power, and it eventually becomes parasitic and corrupt, and it supports mediocrity, it supports conformity. And that's why the shadow elites, the satanic forces, the Luciferian um, power networks who engage in human sacrifices, who engage in cannibalism, these very evil people will easily control the bureaucrats because the bureaucrats promote a culture of conformity. They promote a culture of impotence, of mediocrity. So they're spiritually impotent against these Luciferian forces that use them as puppets for their own power, right? So the bureaucrats aren't actually in power. They will be warped by the shadow elites to be puppets. The bureaucratism's fatal flaws. Runaway parasitism. Bureaucrats regulate for the sake of regulating, wasting resources. So why do bureaucrats regulate? Because they regulate, okay? The bureaucracy will expand for the purpose of bureaucracy. They will waste more resources. They will steal more money. Proliferation of mediocrity, conformity, and passivity. Birth rate collapse, and ennui. So ennui basically means misery and boredom. These are things that will reproduce. So the lack of reproduction is what will be proliferated. And the boredom, misery, this will all be proliferated by the bureaucracy. Inherent corruption. Rule followers are easily dominated by those willing to break rules. So yes, the people in the bureaucracy promote conformity. They promote following rules. So anyone who doesn't want to follow the rules, anyone who wants to break the rules, anyone who enjoys breaking rules, such as psychopaths, they will easily control the bureaucrats. Bureaucracies become passive tools for the shadow elites, demonic satanic networks exemplified by people like Jeffrey Epstein. Shadow elites form unbreakable alliances through shared unimaginable evil, rituals, and blackmail, operate above the law, play both sides of every conflict, and treat nominal governments as pawns. Once again, bureaucracies become passive shells for the shadow elites to control. Conclusion of the dialogue. By process of elimination, only Ascensionism is logically and morally valid. It is inherently anti-status quo and anti-bureaucratic, focused solely on moving up the value hierarchy and achieving greater magnificence. All other paths lead to spiritual stagnation and a world secretly ruled by satanic forces. So here's a story about Ascension. Basically, in the story, this is purely a mythological story. A worm becomes a bird. So this is an elevation in form. He becomes greater. A worm becomes a bird. The bird then becomes a dragon. The dragon becomes an even mightier dragon. And then a bunch of dragons fight amongst each other for dominance. And then humanity eventually conquers the dragons because of their superior intelligence, because of their technological innovation. They go to war with the dragons, and eventually there's a conflict between humans and dragons. And so the humans win through ingenuity. And so the most intelligent human is the innovator king, the one who basically invents the kind of weaponry and technology required to win against the dragons in a conflict. And so Carson becomes the innovator king, and he actually is such a genius that he I guess it's a de facto emperor, and so he leads humanity to galactic conquest. Yada yada. So okay, basically the humans go to war against the aliens to rule over the galaxy. And so humanity eventually wins. Because of the military commander Fisher. So I suppose I don't think there's actually. Oh yeah, Fisher is the emperor. Sorry, I'm butchering my own story. So basically, humanity conquers the dragons, and then humanity conquers the aliens. So at the peak of material and technological magnificence, a spiritual crisis emerges. Philosopher Hemlock develops Ascensionism, recognizing history as an upward trend of ever greater magnificence. Hemlock prophesizes an imminent fall into stagnation and decline, bureaucratization, mediocrity, corruption, shadow elites performing Luciferian rituals. Realizing no clear way forward exists, Hemlock quarantines himself in a Martian spaceship to contemplate how the Ascensionist movement can continue the way upwards regardless. He maintains uncertainty of success but strives regardless. Okay. So basically, when humans conquer the aliens, you think all is well, right? But problem is now the soul becomes restless. The spirit is inherently miserable, right? So there's a spiritual crisis, there's a moral crisis, and so because now the wars are over and humanity has dominated the entire universe, now the bureaucracies expand. The bureaucracies become more powerful, and they breed mediocrity in the human species. The humans become basically slaves to the bureaucracy, um, and therefore um, the morality and the innate character of humanity becomes corrupt, mediocre, and become everyone becomes nihilistic. And so there's like a depressive cloud that hangs over humanity despite them conquering the universe. And then um because as usual the bureaucrats breed conformity and the bureaucratic system becomes corrupt, parasitic, and unaccountable to its own corruption, then they become a passive vessel for the interests of the shadow elites. So the shadow elites manipulate the bureaucracies for their own interests. They perform the Luciferian rituals, and so once again, the world is back to the current state that we're experiencing right now, where there's an overall sense of spiritual stagnation, and behind the scenes, there are satanic forces which control the masses. And so, Hemlock. So I realize what's going on, and I think, oh, there's just no real way forward because it seems that Ascent has already been maximized. The humanity is in as good of a position as it can be. It's elevated as much as it possibly can, given that they've dominated the universe and expressed their will to power maximally. So, basically, I retreat into a Martian spaceship and I contemplate. I try to philosophize my way out of the inevitable stagnation of existence. I try to think about how the Ascensionist movement could continue up, even though there's no obvious path. And even if there's nothing you can do, even if spiritual stagnation is inevitable, even if cosmic decline, even if the descensionary forces win out against the ascensionary forces, nonetheless, you need to try your best to keep moving upwards beyond all limits, beyond reality itself if necessary. You need to have the right alignment with Elevatum. You need to have the right alignment with magnificence, even when magnificence is impossible. Even when mediocrity is inevitable, you need to be aligned with magnificence, because otherwise, you will just be pulled into misery and mediocrity, and you will just be pulled into a coffin anyway. So if you're gonna be stuck in a coffin anyways, at least put yourself in a position to where if it is possible to escape, you could escape. But if it's not possible to escape, then you should still be vigilant anyways. So it's like, think about this, right? If you are trapped in a cycle of misery, you need to adopt a posture of victory regardless. If you must lose a war, nonetheless, you should fight to the bitter end, even if you know that you'll lose 100%, because that's how you create the most meaning in life. That's how you create the most value, right? The alternative is simply being despondent and being miserable anyways, right? And because we're acting in uncertainty, because we're not certain that we will fail, nonetheless, we should try to elevate regardless. We should try to. So, yes, always go to the higher level, even if it is impossible. That sounds like a platitude, but I honestly think that there's no clear evidence that Ascensionism will succeed. There's no clear evidence that we can always move to a higher level. And so maybe stagnation is inevitable, but we don't know that for certain. We don't know for certain that Ascensionism is a failure, right? So we should try our best regardless. And even if we knew that ascent was impossible, even if we knew that stagnation was inevitable, nonetheless, we should adopt a posture towards ascent. We should be aligned with a higher form of being, even if it is materially futile. Because the kind of conscience that Ascensionism develops, the kind of conscience that you develop when you activate the ascensionary intuition, when you have the correct mode of thinking, which is in alignment with magnificence, which is to promote valor even in the face of infinite adversity, to promote bravery even when you are against insurmountable obstacles and enemies, to have that kind of valor, to have the courage to face the void even if it is inevitable. I I think that is magnificent in itself, and that I think that self justifies. Um, yeah. That being said, ultimately we don't know that Ascensionism will necessarily fail, so we should try our best regardless. Anyways, so that's volume 11, and I will continue with the last 3 volumes in the future, and I'll probably cover the Hemlockian Thought series as well. So yeah, that's it for now. Until then, elevatum.